Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University.
So Vicky, great to see you as always. A really exciting time, I'm sure you'll agree. We're on the eve of the Paralympic Games in Paris. Tell us how you're feeling.
I'm really excited. Paris is really what I look forward to, going to the Paralympics, being there in some capacity, and on this occasion I'm going to enjoy it and I'm more a guest.
And tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing in the build-up to this 4-year cycle.
So for the lead-up, we've been working on a number of projects. Some are continuation of work that we did into Tokyo, and others were brand new projects.
So tell us a little bit about exactly what they look like.
Yeah, so one of our key areas at the Peter Howson Centre for Disability Sport here at Loughborough University is wheelchair configurations. And we were approached by Wheelchair Tennis to have a look at the surfaces that wheelchair tennis play on. I'm not sure if people are aware, but it's the first Paralympic Games where the tennis will be played on a clay court. And for many, they perhaps won't like that because it will feel quite soft. It could make an athlete sort of feel quite heavy in their arms. And obviously what we want to do is optimise the wheelchair configuration to optimise their performance and mobility on the court.
And of course they're playing at Roland Garros, one of the most iconic tennis venues in the world. I guess there must be an element of excitement too for the players?
Yes, from what I can gather, chatting to the players, they're extremely excited to be at Roland Garros this year for the Paralympics. What some people might not know is that it's a clay surface. So people watched recently Wimbledon and other Grand Slams, and surfaces are quite pinnacle to how an athlete might perform in terms of their performance of wheelchair tennis.
And tell us a little bit about the research you've been doing and how that tangibly benefits those individuals.
If we're focusing on wheelchair tennis here, then we've been doing a number of projects around tennis surface area, and that's been done in a huge sort of stakeholder collaboration effort with Wimbledon, with Nick Webben, with wheelchair manufacturers as well. So it's really brought together a number of key stakeholders, but the main aim was two things. Was one, to enable an athlete to be confident in their wheelchair setup, because it's going to change depending on the surface. And two, that we're looking to increase the mobility performance on that surface as well.
So what can we expect from Paris? Is it mobility issues? Is it the general wear and tear of the chair? Just tell us a little bit about kind of what we could expect from clay compared to, say, grass.
When a wheelchair tennis player pushes on clay against perhaps pushing on grass or a hard surface, then they must consider their chair set up differently. We want to optimise the wheelchair configuration of the athlete, the interaction in the environment. It's going to be hot in Paris. It's going to be softer surface to what they're used to pushing on. So all of those environmental factors, the wheelchair interaction on the surface, the player in the heat, hydration, the optimisation of the chair, all become quite pinnacle and important characteristics of performance.
And how long has this project been going on for? And what have you noticed from a researcher as well?
The project that we're doing with wheelchair tennis on the surfaces has been going on for the last 4 years. You always know as a scientist what is in the forefront. So we know that we're going to be in LA, we know we're going to go to Brisbane. So we're ahead of the game from the minute the players land from Tokyo. So what we want to do is get confidence with the wheelchair tennis players to think about different configurations, the different tyres they might be using, the caster wheels, the tyre pressure. But then we must work with the manufacturers as well to bring it all together and enable an athlete to feel comfortable and understand the results. As a scientist, we use a term that's called evidence-based practice. So we gather data and then we feed that back to the athlete to show them the numbers, show them improvements. But it's important that you get the buy-in from the athletes as well in terms of how do they feel. So we might make a recommendation to an athlete around their configuration, but if it doesn't feel right, they're not going to take that on board. So it's really been a learning process for the last 4 years of trying to think about small changes might lead to a big change. So it's a stepwise process that we've been doing over the last 4 years.
And how tricky is that as a researcher and also working with the athletes to almost protect that information because you want to have the competitive edge when you go out onto the court?
As a researcher, competition of others, competition in the arena is very important. But typically in wheelchair sport, if you watch the London Marathon, whatever Dave Weir's got, what Heinz Fry had in the old days, what the Silver Bullet, the Swiss athletes got, younger athletes will then go out and buy that particular wheelchair gadget, the wheelchair configuration, whether it be a hand rim, something just unique on that wheelchair. And so you might see wheelchair tennis players having blue tyres or red tyres, but that's come through the science of what we've been doing, not just the fact they want to change the colour, but it has to be optimised to them. So what you might see Alfie using will be different to what you might see Gordon using. But it's driven by the numbers and the science, but again, they need to feel comfortable.
And obviously you need that buy-in from the athlete too. They have to want to listen to what you have to say.
All of the work that we do here at Loughborough University has been co-created as a team of people, and the athlete sits in the centre of that. So a lot of the consultation of the scientific questions have been driven by the athletes going to the coaches saying, I want to learn about this. I'm going to be playing on clay. Is my chair optimised for the clay surface? Now they might have tinkered with it themselves, and some of the work that myself and Thomas have been doing has actually really been just showing them what they've tinkered with is actually the right choice. And some of it, we've been pushing it to say, let's think about this as well. So it has been an embedded process of learning with the athletes as well. I mean, they're the person who uses the wheelchair, plays the tennis, is in that sporting environment. So we learn from them, they learn from us, and we listen, which is the important aspect as well.
So it's almost those small marginal gains can result in major improvements?
I wouldn't say that we see major improvements in some of our elite athletes that we work with. They're major perhaps that I've got them to change something, but in terms of the performance on court, it might just be the fact that they can just go that 0.1 metres per second quicker on a turn, or actually reach a ball just in a better, more optimal position to make a shot, because they've got there just that fraction earlier than what they would have done by not having that configuration. Now, to the eye of someone who doesn't understand wheelchair sport, they might not spotted those changes, but they're really meaningful in the bigger, broader context.
And let's just talk a little bit about what else we can expect from wheelchair sport at the Paralympics. We're going to have a lot of new eyes on the sport. What could people expect from, say, wheelchair rugby compared to wheelchair basketball to wheelchair tennis?
As I sort of mentioned, wheelchair sport at the Paralympics is brilliant. It really is an eye-opener around the sport. They are very different. There's different characteristics of the impairments, the health conditions that you see in different sports. So wheelchair basketball is very different to wheelchair rugby. There's different styles of play, a bit of cat and mouse that you might see in wheelchair rugby, where just a turnover in wheelchair rugby could be a game changer. You might not have the right sort of tactics or gameplay to really bring back a 2-point deficit, where in wheelchair basketball, because you've got a 2-point shot, a 3-point shot, you can perhaps turn over and draw in a gap of 10 points by having a really good quarter. So there's different styles of the sports, different metrics of really what you're looking for with the sports. But to me, that's what excites it as a scientist, is the different dynamics and even the people that I work with.
And obviously wheelchair basketball is a big part of Loughborough University's sporting ecosystem with the Lightning franchise and all that kind of thing. What can we expect from those guys, and what part have we played as Loughborough University in their development?
Loughborough University has played a huge part in wheelchair basketball in a number of ways, and maybe too much for me to describe now, but in brief, if there's some highlights, then I would say that the GB team will consist of a lot of Loughborough Lightning players. So they've come through a really centralised training regime from George Bates and the team at Loughborough Sport here at Loughborough. And we, the academics, the scientists, have been part of that journey. So Pippa has been a PhD student working with BWB, the British Wheelchair Basketball Association, and Loughborough Lightning, and been embedded to be there in competitions, trialling, gathering data, feeding back to the coaches. George Bates has been a fantastic ambassador to the sport of wheelchair basketball. He's one of our high performance coaches and really developed a whole breadth of female para athletes. I believe that there might have even been a wheelchair basketball player who first wanted to be a wheelchair racer, but yet she transitioned to the sport of wheelchair basketball. So there's been transitions through the ecosystem at Loughborough because people see it. They want to be part of it, and I think we've really showcased Parasport to a new level here at Loughborough.
Let's just talk a little bit, Vicky, about the future of Parasport and some of the things that you're working on which can perhaps help change a little bit of, I'm going to say, the research and the perceptions of Parasport. Tell us a little about what the future looks like for you.
As a scientist in Parasport, we're always looking for a new future in some of the sports that we work with. There's going to be some significant changes, I believe, in some sports when they come back from Paris. Working with wheelchair basketball, they were at the edge of being on the agenda in Paris because they weren't quite compliant with their classification procedures. So behind the scenes we worked on that, and obviously they will be centre stage in Paris. But women in sport is a real hot topic, and one of which Loughborough University is looking to embrace in the next few years. And Parasport has been on the continuum of that already. We've done some work with World Wheelchair Rugby, looking at the points within the female players. It might be unfortunate that we might not see many female players in Paris. There certainly was a few female players in Tokyo in wheelchair rugby because it's a mixed gender sport. But we need to do better. We need to have more regular female players playing in the mixed gendered sport of wheelchair rugby. And some of our work that we're doing that will get launched when the players and the teams come back from Paris is an exciting point of time where working with Richard Allcroft, the president of wheelchair rugby, we are looking at the points classification for females, and there's going to be an exciting trial period for the next 12 months that launches and maps a new horizon in that sport.
So tell us a bit, why is wheelchair rugby mixed compared to single gender sport within wheelchair basketball?
In Paralympic sport, to bring a new sport on or to have a sport, we've got to have the number of athletes. So in some wheelchair track events and field events in athletics, we might see a straight final because there might only be in the world 8 double amputee athletes, for example. Wheelchair basketball has a long track record as being a key sport in the Paralympic movement. Wheelchair rugby is a younger sport. I believe it maybe had an exhibition event in 2000 and then actually became on the Paralympic cycle. But it's different because of the impairment and the classification. So typically in wheelchair rugby, it's for athletes who have 4 limbs impaired, and basketball has a classification where 2 limbs are impaired. There's less people out there with 4 limbs impaired, quadriplegia. So therefore you're working with a much smaller population, but it has to be a sport that is played in a certain number of countries that can be reached by people. So it's still developing, and hence there's not as many females who are quadriplegic or have some form of 4 limbs impaired. So therefore it's more inclusive as being a mixed gender sport. I mean, maybe one day we might see female only and male only, but it's not quite there yet. We were fortunate that Loughborough was invited to a female only wheelchair rugby competition this time last year that was housed in Paris to try to elevate female performance in wheelchair sport. And that served as a framework for us to gather data to then compare against the males to see the differences of strength impairment, how quick the females are on the court based on the males. And we're presenting that data and collating that findings as we speak to present that to World Wheelchair Rugby to look at some changes in rules and regulations.
And of course it's known colloquially as murder ball, so a nice friendly sport to be involved in?
I mean, wheelchair rugby is fantastic. At times I'm grimacing thinking, is the player going to get off that deck in one piece? It is murder ball. You are allowed to hit and make impact. It's evolved like that, I guess, because some of the players are less agile and they perhaps haven't got the trunk and stability to move out of a collision. Doesn't say that you can't make a dangerous collision. So certainly there's a sin box at the end where a player could get taken off the court. They have their penalty and come back on again. It becomes 4-on-3 because they've done something that's been illegal, which makes it really exciting. But yeah, I mean, traditionally it is called murder ball because it's so physical.
And maybe a tricky question to answer, and a broad question at that, but Parasport and the Paralympics are obviously so important for societal issues and for wider understanding. What power do you think sport has in that instance?
I think Parasport is a really good model for social inclusion, visibility. I think in the old days it's been portrayed in the media incorrectly, that sort of superhuman, superhero. There's a lot of publications in the IPC movement at the moment of saying, I'm participating in the Paralympics, and that's a big moment at the moment where athletes are now saying, I'm competing in the Paralympics. They are athletes. I've worked in the Paralympic movements for almost 30 years. I always saw it as a sport because I came from sport, but For some people who haven't got that competitive edge in them and they're watching sport because it is a social thing to do with family and friends, we should never be looking at parasport as being, oh, they're just taking part. They're competitive. The athletes I work with have trained just as hard as our Olympic counterparts. But that said, there is a place in society to be thinking about physical activity and health. And if we can see athletes with disabilities taking part, don't get me wrong, there are obstacles that are maybe more sort of varied and preventing people with impairments to take part. So, for example, is a local gym accessible? Things do change with the Paralympic movement to do that. But there's still a long way to go with that. But I still think there is a role model around parasport to young kids to be thinking, I can do that. And we must just be sensible of how we portray that message.
I think also, I don't know whether you've seen, but obviously you've been involved in Channel 4's launch, but their marketing campaign's been really clever, as it's kind of got rid of those messages that it's a disabled person who's done that, and actually, like you say, it's focused on the athlete doing something great within their sport. In
the media, we've got to think about the messaging of parasport, and that's where we've got experts here at Loughborough in the sociology, the psychology of sport, who have been working with the media, whether that be Loughborough in London campus, whether it's colleagues here within the School of Sport and Exercise and Health Sciences. But we have been working with the media, with Channel 4, with the commentary of the BBC, around the correct way or the way that we should be thinking about parasport. But the crucial thing there is the lived experiences. So we need to be listening to the voice of the person with that disability. And that's the whole heart of my research as well, is that if I put together a research question, it's come from the voice of the athletes. We listen and we do that co-production. 50% of my scientists at the Peter Harrison Centre have got a disability, whether that's sensory, whether that's a physical disability. It's very important that you're seen to be the scientist, that you're seen to be out there, just the same way as I listen to the athletes and the coaches. So from the outside looking in, there seems to be improvements, but do you think there's still more work to be done? There's definitely a lot more work to be done in the Paralympic movement. We're only really touching the edge. You'll see from the Channel 4 advert, they've been really bold on this occasion. And some individuals and friends of mine have just said it's a chaotic advert. I've watched it once. Yes, it was chaotic. I've watched it twice. I know the athletes in there. So I think I can sense where they want to go with things, but it is a little bit chaotic, but I think that's good because it then makes you think about the challenges and question why have they done that. So we need to be bold, we need to really be prominent in some of our messages that we're doing around parasport to make it inclusive, equitable and really be powerful in its role. And do you think, as a thought leader in the field, do you think you'll ever get to a point in your career where you think we've nailed this, or is it constantly evolving and you always have to move and you always to stay ahead of the curve to make it kind of as best as it can be? Yeah, I mean, Dan, that's a great question in terms of whether or not we're ever finished. And I throw it back by saying it's not just parasport, it's sport. I think regardless of parasport, Olympic sport, professional sports, we're always going to be evolving and changing. There's going to be those challenges. We want to be at the forefront of making exciting, bring in sponsorship, making the value to sport. I just feel, I guess, where we are, I think, at the moment of the mergers of lines with parasport is still that health inequalities and ensuring that we're using parasport to improve the physical education at schools, making sure that school kids with a disability have the privileges that I had as being a young child at school, at primary school, wanting to engage in sport. And so that is the crossroads where we really got the challenges at this moment in time. Once we get that right, we can then build up the next tiers and levels that we've actually got. So I would say we've still got a long way to go. And I guess that's not for one individual person or organisation to do, that's a collective societal change? Yes, definitely. Anything that we do, and I think that's where Loughborough really embraces itself in the sense of we do believe in collaboration, collective ideas and moving forward together. It has to be teamwork, it has to be integrated in the problems in the society as well. Perfect. I think that's a nice place to leave it, so thank you so much for your time. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to the Experts in Sport podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, then please contact me, Martin Foster, at m.foster@loughborough.ac.uk. Thanks for listening. See you next time.